Down to business.
That's the nectar of the gods, baby.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the best liquid-fueled, liquid-lubricated show on the interwebs. This is the Whiskey Musings broadcast, and I am your elegant host. You know, for those of you that follow on my, before I get started, let me just say that you may hear some sounds in the background only because of the fact that my son's team, his semi-professional indoor team, is making their debut. And my wife is watching the game being streamed live. So you may hear some sounds in the background. Hopefully I've got it set up such that it makes it to where we don't have that occur. But that being said, wouldn't surprise me any if you hear something in the background. Okay. So this entire week, there's been a lot of talk, and actually I can even say just within the last year, 4 years, whatever, there's been a lot of talk about things like systemic racism, that if you're white, you are automatically racist, and therefore you need to, disavow that. You need to do all kinds of things to basically make yourself. I don't know. I honestly, I don't understand it, so I can't really say what you're supposed to be doing. But apparently, if you are white, you are automatically racist. No matter what, you've already been given white privilege. Now, that being said, there's been a bunch of things that have occurred here in the news cycle this last week. And a lot of it has to deal with, things that are considered racist. Like, for an example, there was a article that was posted that came out. There was an Oregon school district that deemed math is racist, or at least, let me correct myself and say, showing your work in math is racist. There was an article that talked about how standardized testing, SAT testing, is racist. We've had, discussions about Dr. Seuss books being canceled, and because of the fact that they show racial stereotypes. And so it kind of really got me to thinking. It got me to thinking that maybe there's something to it. I mean, if everybody and their brother is jumping on this train, and I'm just saying, everybody and their brother, this is a broad-based stroke, but if a lot of people are jumping on this train, there might be something to this. And so I started kind of looking into it. And a few things that I found over time is, number one, the main thing that I found is that apparently if you are white, you are automatically racist. There is no ifs, ands, or buts about it in the view of some people. And I don't subscribe to that necessarily. But I also found that there's other people out there, and by other people, I mean people of other races as well, who have come up with the same kind of conclusion. And so obviously I'm not the only one who's thinking about this. That being said, though, there's also a couple of articles that I'm going to show you, a couple things that have come out where it actually appears that it's not just white conservatives that are deemed racist. There's actually a undercurrent that has shown up in the last few years. Like I said, the last 4 or 5 years, there has been an undercurrent of studies and those kinds of things that have popped up that are showing a little bit more of a different perspective than just, conservatives are racist. So this first one I'm gonna bring up. It actually posted or popped up into the Psychology Today, and it was posted on February 28th. And let me go ahead and bring that up here. I gotta pop it up. Okay. So as you can see, are liberals really more egalitarian? Now, egalitarian, I had to actually look that up. And egalitarian, basically what that means is it is a belief in or characterizations of equality. You want equality across all different boundaries. Now, I totally get it. You know, we all want equality because realistically, that's what America is like. But looking at this article, and the subheading kind of says it all in this particular case, is that recent studies find that conservatives treat others more equally than liberals. Now, this is interesting because, you know, it's a commonly held belief that liberals are actually more in tune to racial bias and that kind of stuff, and that they're going to be the ones who are more likely to be less racist than conservatives. But this appears to kind of debunk that. And so I'm going to read to you the first top two bullet points here. And actually, I'm going to get my camera out of the way so that you can actually read it. The first one says, recent experiments reveal that in some cases, it is liberals who tend to treat information and people more unequally on the basis of sex, race, and group status. The second bullet point says, in a set of studies, liberals wish to censor written passages that portrayed low-status groups unfavorably more than identical passages that portrayed high-status groups unfavorably, whereas conservatives treated the passages more comparably. Now, the thing about this that I find fascinating about this article is the fact that, you know, one, this is sort of an impromptu study. It's not actually a study, you know, a full scientific study. Basically, what they did is they kind of took some experiments and did some things with things like resumes and you know, manipulated who was the person giving the resume, who was the, you know, putting equal resumes up next to one another and testing people who self-identified as a certain political leaning or a certain thought process that you know, they self-identified themselves as a certain type of way. And so what they did is they took these studies and they kind of took a look at the results, and they found, ironically, that yeah, there was a bit of a bias when it came to being liberal and looking at these studies this way. So this next is a excerpt from that article, this next screenshot, and I'll go ahead and bring that up. So here, let me try and get this a little bit bigger here. All right, and once again, I'm going to drop my webcam off of this. So, the next thing is, so consistent, and I'm going to read this to you. So consistent with liberal self-reported support for equality, do they actually treat people and groups more equally than conservatives? Several recent studies over the past few years cast doubt on this proposition. And here's the key. So scholars test for unequal treatment, sometimes called a bias, by presenting participants with identical or very similar stimuli. For example, a scientific finding, a resume, okay, and manipulating whom or which group that piece of information is about. For an example, a scientific finding about men or women, a resume for a black or a white job applicant, and then having participants evaluate that piece of information. To the extent that people treat the stimuli differently in the different sex or race conditions, this is considered unequal treatment or bias. If people rated a male candidate as more qualified for a job than a female candidate with the exact same resume, this would be considered an unequal treatment or bias in favor of men or against women. Now, recent experiments or quasi-experiments of this kind suggest that at least sometimes it is liberals who tend to treat information and people more unequally on the basis of sex, race, and group status. Okay? So think about that for just a second. That the recent experiments or quasi-experiments of this kind are showing signs that it's liberals, self-identified liberals, who are actually making the most bias or treating that information or people more unequally on the basis of sex, race, and group status. Now, it's not that I'm trying to bash these people. I'm really not. What I'm attempting to do here is to open the eyes of possibly somebody who watches this and realizes that, hey, there is a possibility that even though I am self-purporting as being biased or being unbiased, that I'm actually inadvertently doing something that is a bias. And it kind of got me to thinking, because if you think about it, if you self-identify as a particular group, let's say you self-identify as an Italian American or, an African American, an Asian American, what you are doing essentially is you are setting up a subgroup inside of a group. We're Americans. When we park our butts here on this soil and are born here, we're considered Americans. But because we've gone and separated ourselves and calling ourselves a subgroup of that set, we have actually ingrained a separate piece of bias. We're either saying that we are either better or worse than just being American. And I've always had some issues with identifying yourself. I mean, either you're American or you're not. And anecdotally, I've been to other countries around the globe, and these, whenever I go into other countries, no matter what skin color a person is, when you ask them what they are, they identify themselves as, I'm Italian, I'm Canadian, I'm, English. There is no hyphenation on that. There's no hyphenation there. And I've kind of fought, and again, this is an anecdotal setup, but I've kind of thought about this, that this is an interesting dichotomy in comparison to what we have here in America, where we seem to emphasize subgroups of Americans. And it's not that, this is necessarily bad. It's just, it's an interesting effect, I think. When somebody comes here to America, they come here for a purpose, and they are here to do something, ideally join the country, become a productive member of American society, to live what would be considered as the American dream. What would be the purpose in identifying yourself with another organization, another country that you have left? I mean, here's an example, kind of another anecdotal situation. My wife's grandfather or great-great-grandfather, one of them, was Italian, came over here on the boat. And as soon as they got to Ellis Island, they stopped speaking Italian 100%. They immersed themselves into the American culture because, as they put it, we are now Americans. And they came here legally. They came in, legally, all right? And they wanted to assimilate. And that was the whole purpose of the idea of the melting pot here in America. It had to deal with assimilation. It had to deal with being a part of it. And unfortunately, I think that in terms of setting up yourself to separate yourself and understand, you can celebrate, there is a fine line. I have to admit, there is a fine line between celebrating who you are and where you come from and actually being negative against the country that you're at or that you're with. But again, the interesting anecdotal dichotomy that I show, or that I've demonstrated and seen, is that when you go into another country and you ask them, oh, what are you? They'll tell you, I'm English, or I'm Canadian, or I'm Italian. It wouldn't matter what their skin color is, because their skin color, believe it or not, is an immutable factor of them. And because of that, They can't change it. Just like I can't change my skin. I can't change being white. Okay. So for me to sit here and to actually say, I renounce my whiteness, that just doesn't make sense. It really doesn't. Now, as a part of that article that I was showing you, there's another article, and I'm gonna let's see, how am I gonna do this? Okay, so I'm gonna try and bring this up as well. So this is a sub article from. This is like a referenced article. So this is actually a paper that was written as a subset to that article that I just put up. And let me see if I can get so let me change it over to this. Okay. So this is the abstract of a referenced paper from that Psychology Today article. And basically what this is, and I'm going to read this to you. So this is the competence downshift by white liberals, okay? And this is part of the abstract. So let me read this. So most whites, particularly socio-political liberals, now endorse race equality. I think everybody can agree we all want race equality here in America. That's what we should be fighting for, right? So archival and experimental research reveals that a subtle but reliable, okay, so subtle but reliable, ironic consequence is that white liberals self-present less competence to minorities than other whites do. That is, they patronize minorities, stereotyped as lower status and less competent. Okay. Now, the way they did this, and this is where it goes on, is they did an initial archive demonstration of this competence downshift. And what they did in one of the studies, they examined the content of political speeches, white Republican and white Democrat presidential candidates' campaign speeches. And what they did was they took a look at all of these and they analyzed the speech pattern. They analyzed the words that were being used. And they found by doing that although Republican candidates did not significantly shift their language based on audience racial composition, Democrat candidates actually used less competence-related language to minority or majority, a minority audience than what they did to white audiences. Okay, so essentially what this is telling us, if by looking at this, what this is basically saying is that the stereotype of a conservative, a white conservative, being more racially biased, I should say, than a white liberal is potentially a fallacy. And so again, you're looking at what essentially is a stereotypical information, is that you've got these people out there who are basically saying that being a conservative, especially a white conservative, is automatically racist. And this is a wrong assumption. I'm going to be honest with you. This is a wrong assumption. Okay. In my viewpoint, it's totally wrong. Totally wrong. Okay. So, and once again, as I told you, my wife is obviously getting excited about the game for whatever reason, but anyway, to get back to my point. So this is an indicator. These are two relatively scientific studies that have been taken a look at and have focused on the differences between a liberal and a Democrat. And again, a liberal and a conservative. In particular, most people think Democrat and Republican in that sense. So, these are just two examples, two studies that have been done that indicate there is a potential that liberals are actually, by trying to be more non-racist, they are inadvertently creating themselves to be racist and have a racial bias. And there was a term that came up that I actually in some of the videos in that I was watching, there was a term that came up, and this is true. It's called soft bigotry. And an example of this would be something like, let's say, taken for an example, our current president, Joe Biden. Joe Biden made a statement in a town hall that he did not believe that black and brown, specifically black and brown folks, could not operate a computer or get onto the internet very easily. This would be an example of what's called soft bigotry, because in the sense, we kind of understand what he was attempting to do. He was attempting to basically say that, hey, we need to help those people out, and all will assume all good intentions. But in the reality, he's actually providing what would be considered more of a backhanded insult, because he's basically saying that those skin colors, those people of color, can't operate computers and don't understand it. It's the same thought process that we have with things like voter ID. Voter ID, if you ask, generally speaking, if you ask Democrats if they actually believe that that a person of color, regardless of the color, that a person of color can go out and get identification or already has identification to prove who they are, the minor majority, I won't say all of them, but there's a minor majority that basically state that yes, they have troubles because they're in low income areas. They have troubles getting the basic ID that might be needed in order to be able to vote. And this conversely has also been demonstrated anecdotally or in an actual poll that conservatives don't fall within that same kind of fallacy. They actually believe that these people still can get stuff. Now, I'm not saying, understand, I'm not trying to make any kind of necessarily any kind of statement about socioeconomic boundaries or any of this stuff. I am simply referring to the idea that conservatives are consistently racist, and they get called out that way, that Republicans are racist, and this is the mainstream media that is talking about this, and they are consistently putting this as a part of the narrative. Now, speaking about narratives, it's kind of interesting how they tend to try and portray, even people of the same ethnicity try and portray that they are oppressed in some way, that this is, conservatives and Republicans are pushing them down and so on and so forth. An example of this has to be during conversations between Don Lemon of CNN and Morgan Freeman, where Don Lemon asks, and you can search the video. I don't have it tonight, but you can search the video. And Don Lemon basically asked Morgan Freeman, does he believe that race is involved in financial inequality or the economic inequality? And Morgan Freeman flat out just says no. And he looks at Don Lemon and he says, look at you, look at me. Are we, we've made it. We've done it. And the funny thing about it is that when you get in conversations, people tend to not look at or not acknowledge people such as Thomas Sowell, Morgan Freeman, Clarence Thomas. Let's see, who else have I got? Larry Elder. There was another one. Denzel Washington. They tend to not want to recognize these individuals as examples of a non-racial intent in our society today. These people, Colin Powell is another one. These people are people of color. They've raised themselves beyond what would be considered stereotypical, and they've made something of themselves. And when you ask, or when you bring that up to someone who is staunchly saying that, people of color are oppressed, when you bring that up to people, they look at you with either a blank stare, or they refuse to actually acknowledge, or they do even worse. They call them names. They call those people names because they say they sold out the, just to pick on African American culture, they sold out the black man. And I'm sorry, but you absolutely cannot pick and choose who you want. You need to have a cross section to basically explain what's going on. In fact, Shaquille O'Neal just announced he got his doctorate degree. He got his doctorate. I don't know what it's in, but I think he's kind of in the same boat as Dr. Jill Biden. I think it had something to do with education. But the point is that he went back to school. He took his gift. He had a gift of playing basketball. He took his gift. He used it to the best of his ability. And yes, it wasn't easy. Guess what, folks? Things are hard. It's not always easy to go someplace or do something like that. It's not easy to get ahead in this world. It takes work. And he did it. He pushed himself and he got to his doctorate. That's an aspiring individual. That is somebody that you can go forward and aspire to. And it's not just famous people either. I mean, here's an example. So let me pop this up and swap over to, actually, it's already here. So in this particular case, here's an example of Zuby Music. This is on Twitter just this week. So Zuby Music brought out at least 80% of the actual racism, sexism, misogyny, and misandry that I see and hear comes from people on the left side of the political aisle. It is astonishing that these forms of bigotry and discrimination are still associated primarily with the right. The power of branding. And Zuby self-identifies as a rapper, an author, a podcaster, a coach, an Oxford graduate, has Strong Advice Fitness ebook, and he's black. Okay? So this thread further down, this next one, all of my life I found it easier to get on with people in the center and conservatives. They genuinely treat me as an equal and normal human being with full agency and ability. Lefties always have to bring up race, and they treat me like a pet rather than an equal. Now, this is something, as an example, this is something that Candace Owens has been talking about with her whole idea of Blexit. Okay? Moving down to the next one, Zuby says, this occurs even if I don't share my own political views. Center-right people don't make assumptions. There's no presumption that I will or must agree with them. Leftists, on the other hand, normally assume that I'm on their side. Oh, he's black. This is his quote. And become hostile when they discover otherwise. Okay? Next one down. Racism is a negligible issue in my personal life. Hasn't held me back from anything. But I don't know if ever been called, and there's a bunch of words here. You can read them right here. Okay? I'm not going to read them, but etc. by somebody on the right. Always the tolerant left. And he's claiming to have a large sample size. And what he says here is, he also says, to be ultra clear, I don't mean to say that most left-leaning people engage in this behavior, but that most people who do engage in the behavior are leftists. And it's tied to their identity politics, privilege, oppression, intersectional BS. And he's fine. And he finally says there are very fine people on both sides. Now, you take a look at that. And honestly, you take a look at that, and he's not, Zuby's not the only one. I mean, I've seen videos of others, other people of color who have also mentioned this exact same thing. So we have a problem here, and this is the problem. It's a stereotype that has been thrown out there. And what I'm encouraging everyone to do is look at your own interactions. Look inside yourself and look at your own interactions, because here's kind of an idea. And I'm just going to float this out here, okay? What if we stop looking at skin color? I know this is crazy, but what if we stop looking at skin color? I mean, isn't that what Martin Luther King wanted? He wanted people to judge his daughters, his quote, his daughters, by the content of their character and not the color of their skin. And this is how we need to interact every day. Because even if you are attempting to bring things up, and let me just point this out as far as like the whole standardized testing being racist idea, okay? In my mind, that's ludicrous. And I'll tell you why. Because standardized testing, by its very nature, should be, regardless of anything, should be across the board a standardized test. Something that is applied to everyone the same. And those test results are looked at or viewed at in a standardized fashion. And I'll give you an example of one of the best examples that I can certainly have from my personal experience. The ASVAB, to get you in the military. What is that? Well, let me tell you what the acronym is. It's the Armed Services Vocational Aptitude Battery Test. And what it is designed to do is to evaluate any one person's individual intelligence, ability to solve complex problems, to be able to do math, to be able to do reading and comprehension, basic things that our school system is supposed to be teaching all of our children. And it is designed ideally to weed out and choose and find individuals who can go into certain vocations, meaning certain jobs, certain military occupational specialties within the service. It is a standardized test that is given to everyone who enters. Everyone, regardless of color, regardless of sex, regardless of age. It is given to every single person, and it is designed, again, to determine what your capabilities, your individual capabilities are in order to make a best fit for not only you, but also for the services when it comes to your job. Now, granted, you could maybe take a look at the results of the ASVAB and kind of see what's going on. But realistically, I can tell you that just because a standardized test is a standardized test, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's racist in any way, shape, or form, especially in today's day and age. Now, I can understand. I honestly can understand. Back in the day, there's certain things like, for an example, affirmative action. Okay, so affirmative action, when it came out, and the whole concept of trying to make sure that certain races at the time got placed within businesses and stuff, there was a reason for them to be having that. And that is due to the fact that back in 1960, in the 60s, there was literally a race problem. Okay. But the reality of it is today, you don't see that as much. You're not seeing it as much unless you look at people who are so focused on race as a determination of things like being able to work a computer, to get an ID, to buy a car, to get loans, things like that. All of that stuff has virtually been, as far as I know, been erased, and the stuff that hasn't it can go into the court system, and the court system can figure it out. Now, that's assuming, I mean, I don't even want to go down that path. So the point that I'm trying to make here is that the more we talk about race, the more it's going to be a actual racist problem. And any one of you, anybody who blames their problems on somebody else's race, I'm going to tell you right now, you're acting no different than what Hitler did in Germany. When he took everybody's ideas, and I know that's not very popular, but when he took his ideas and he basically blamed all of the problems from the German people on the Jewish people, he created and set up the entire thing and blamed them for all of their problems when realistically it was something else. It is so much easier to blame somebody or some other factor on it rather than looking at yourself in the mirror and saying, you know what, I am the one who is responsible for all of this. I am the one who is responsible for working hard and getting my next goal, whatever that is. And I know a lot of people are like, hey, you're a white guy, you know, you can't be talking about race. Well, guess what? Actually, I can, because you know what? The talk has come to my door. The talk has come to my door. And the liberal left, the leftists have brought it to my door. They've brought it here. They've brought it to the door of everybody in America because they have decided to take something and make it into a problem when it actually isn't the problem. And I got one more thing for you. I'm gonna play this, and I'm probably gonna get dinged. At this point, I don't care. This is too important, okay? But this is an interview that Morgan Freeman did on 60 Minutes. And I'm just going to play this. This is copyrighted by CBS. This is their stuff. All this is just commentary on top of this. So I'm going to go ahead and play this. You go ahead and listen to the video, and I'll come right back as soon as it's over. But take a listen to this.
Black History Month you find
ridiculous.
Why?
You're going to relegate my history to a month?
Oh, come on.
What do you do with yours? Which month is White History Month? No, come on, tell me.
Well, I'm Jewish.
Okay, which month is Jewish History Month?
There isn't one.
Oh, why not?
Yeah.
You want one?
No.
I don't either. I don't want a Black History Month. Black history is American history.
How are we going to get rid of racism?
Stop talking about it. I'm going to stop calling you a white man.
Yeah.
And I'm going to ask you to stop calling me a black man. I know you as Mike Wallace. You know me as Morgan Freeman.
There you go. That's, to me, and when that came out, it was incredible. It was incredible. Because when that came out, so many people were like, oh my gosh, there's no way he said something like this. And, you know, it's amazing. There are a lot of younger generational people of color who are coming around to this idea. During my time in my research and looking this up and trying to see, there was a professional soccer player over in England who basically said, he came from America. He's like, I'm not African American. I'm American. I don't know anything about Africa. I've never been to Africa. My parents and grandparents came from Africa, so they can classify themselves that way, but I'm not. I'm American. And Raven Simone said the exact same thing. She was like, I'm not African American. I'm American. I was born here on this soil. I'm American. And there's even a famous quote back when the Civil War ended that does this exact same thing, only this time it's a Native American who stood there. And during the time when Ulysses S. Grant and Robert E. Lee got together and they were signing the treaty, Robert E. Lee looked at him and said, well, I'm glad at least one American is here. And that Native American looked at Robert E. Lee and supposedly said, We are all Americans. And it's that thought process that we need to actually perpetuate in today's society. Rather than looking at a person for an immutable characteristic such as skin color, you should be looking at a person's character. You should be looking at an individual for who they are and what they do, not for what they look like. And I hate to say this, but anybody who falls into the characteristic of things that there is systemic racism, that all cops are bad, that they all are going to shoot black people, and that all whites are racist, that you can't even have a conversation. And white people, the white liberals who have popped up and are putting videos on and saying, well, if you're white and you're not accepting the fact that you have white privilege, then you need to, be less white. Coke actually even had one of the Coke places, the corporate headquarters had a training where it said, be less white. How can I be less white? What color am I supposed to look like? Who am I supposed to go toward? Be less white. That was my call dropping off. Anyway, so I just want to say that we need to start focusing on what are the real issues. Because I can almost certainly guarantee you that even though race may play a factor, correlation does not equal causation. So just because it seems like people of color, or just because statistics show people of color do X, Y, or Z, whatever that is, it doesn't necessarily mean that a person of color is that way. Doesn't matter whether it's stereotypical, whether it's financial, whatever. We need to go beyond this. We need to get beyond this. And the only way to do it, I kind of agree with Morgan Freeman, the only way to do it is to stop talking about it. Stop making it an issue. Stop saying you're a black man, you're a white man, you're an Asian man. Oh, that's another thing. I mean, whenever you look at equality, there's a lot of statistics that are thrown out and about that are saying that, white people are progressing a lot farther and faster than, people of color, especially blacks, as an example. But they forget the Asians. The Asians statistically are outpacing whites in terms of socioeconomic growth. There's studies out there. All you have to do is search the internet and take a look. There's studies out there to talk about this. I've said it before and I'll say it again. You need to make a conscious effort to dispel the rumors and the myths and the what you're being force-fed on the mainstream media, and you need to start thinking critically for yourself. You need to look and research this information up for yourself rather than just regurgitating whatever the mainstream media tells you. Because I'm telling you right now, it is not the truth. It is not the truth. So, honestly, where do we go from here? Well, like I said, I follow Morgan Freeman's idea. Stop talking about race. In all my interactions with people that I interact with on a daily basis, I never once look at an individual as the color of their skin is any indication as to who they are. I don't do that. And we all need to stop doing that ourselves. Okay. So my final whiskey musings thought for the evening is basically this. A teacher went and did an experiment. She put worms in test tubes. One test tube had beer in it. One test tube had wine. One test tube had whiskey. and one test tube had mineral water. She had her students leave for the day. They were going to come back and check what the experiment came out to be. And when they came back into class the next day, she held up the 4 test tubes and she showed them. The worm that was inside the beer was dead. The worm that was inside the wine was dead. The worm that was inside the whiskey was dead. And the worm that was inside the mineral water test tube was alive and well. And so the teacher looked at their students and said, "So, students, what have we learned from all of this?" And a student piped up and said, "Anyone who drinks beer, wine, or whiskey does not have worms." And that's my final Whiskey Musings thought for the evening. Take care, and we'll see you next week, right here on the Whiskey Musings broadcast. Do me a favor, hit subscribe, hit the notification button so you get notified when I go online or when I post a new video. And help me out by going to the Whiskey Musings logo gear store. The link is in the channel description. Go there, buy something. Buy a great sweatshirt with the Whiskey Musings logo. Buy one of my t-shirts that has my tagline, which is, "When I drink, I think." Good night, everybody, and we'll see you next week